When you have your girls, you're never alone. You get together for coffee, maybe to work out, or just to laugh. We created Hey Girl, just for you. Can't wait for you to join us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Hey Girl. I'm your girl, Kim with an E, and this is Hey Girl episode 28. Hey, if you're just joining us, I want to let you know that Hey Girl is a safe space where you can share your experiences and be affirmed. Affirmed. Life can be overwhelming, and we believe in the power of conversation because knowing you're not alone is what helps us get through. And I am so glad that I am not alone today. I have a special guest host with me, my cousin Alva James Johnson. Welcome, Alva.
Thank you, Kim.
So glad to have you today. Listen, I don't want you to just be here and people are wondering who is this person, although no one wonders that. So let me, before I just have you jump into the conversation, let me tell everyone a little bit about you, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here, by the way.
I'm so glad to have you. I want to brag on you a little bit, though. I have your bio here. I'm going to take just a moment to tell everyone who you are. Well, I already said she's my cousin, so there's that. But I don't just have her here because she's my cousin, guys. Let me just brag on Alva James Johnson for one moment, if you don't mind. This woman is a boss, okay? Can I just tell you? She is the assistant professor at the School of Journalism and Communications at Southern Adventist University in Collegedale, Tennessee. She brings to the classroom more than 30 years of experience in the field of journalism. So she has experience doing this kind of work, what she's doing today with us. She's going to help interview our very important guest, who I'm very excited to introduce you to as well. But I want you to know that Alva's career began when she was just a senior in high school. A senior in high school, Alva?
Yeah, a long time ago, trust me.
So you wrote your first article, you published your first article in Insight Magazine. How many of you remember Insight Magazine? And you received a $75 check in the mail, and that's when you knew, right?
Yes, changed my life.
Oh my goodness, $75 yes. Did everything. And you graduated from Oakwood in, should I say the year?
We'll keep that a secret.
Okay, 19 something. Yeah. All right, in the 20th century. And began working for the Syracuse Post-Standard in Syracuse, New York, where you covered eastern suburbs, religion, and a variety of other beats. You then moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where you landed a job with the Omaha World Herald and covered demographics and urban affairs. 9 years later, relocated to South Florida and joined the South Florida Sun Sentinel as the first Caribbean American affairs reporter. And before leaving the paper, served as the editorial writer. In 2013, you joined the staff of the Ledger Enquirer in Columbus, Georgia, as social issues reporter, a position which you held until transitioning to the classroom. So awesome. You have done so many amazing things. You've been a freelance writer and published in several magazine publications, including the Southern Tidings. Oh, speaking of Southern Tidings, silly me. I almost forgot that also on the also made the cover of this little publication for her intense work in the classroom, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, we have a heavy hitter with us, guys. And I'll also mention that she has been happily married to Kim Thorne Johnson for how many years, Alva? How many years has it been?
26 years.
Oh wow, yes, 26 years. Mm-hmm. And you all have two amazing and gorgeous daughters, Shelby and Alexis, who I love so much, and they are brilliant as well. And there's so much on here. I could just go on and on, but I won't belabor the point that it's just a blessing to have you co-hosting today, and you're beyond experience to do this work. So I'm just happy to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I have been watching the show for some weeks now, and I have to say I'm really impressed with the program, the topics that you cover. Kemp and I really like the marriage episodes that you've had, and I know you have another one coming up soon. So
yeah, next week.
Yeah. So I encourage everyone to look at that. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great program.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm so glad. It was your idea to have Rachel on this week, so I'm excited that you've had the idea to invite her as well. And I wanted to talk for a quick moment before we introduce Rachel. By the way, hello to everyone. I jumped right into having Alva on. Who's on with us? I know I know we have friends and family that are probably tuning in, and I'm sure excited to have you with us today as well. So hello, everybody. I know, I'm sure the girls are going to tune in at some point if they're not out there right now. So, hey guys, say hello if you're in the comments. Karen, Lisa, Ruth, we see you out there. Who else is there? Oh, Walker Parker, I see you. So glad to have you guys tuning in. Awesome. Alva, before we introduce Rachel, you've had such great experience in the field of journalism and covering stories. And it just was coincidence. This week, there was some very interesting news stories breaking, unfortunately, actually, in a particular church denomination. Let's just say that Christian church. A little bit of scandal happening, and it's unfortunate because it's kind of the same thing, same story, different church, right? With pastors behaving badly, basically. And it dovetails a little bit with Rachel's story. It just kind of creates an interesting backdrop, I would say, to this idea of religion and behavior towards women, I guess. This attitude towards women, I think, is what I thought about in the way that women are treated sometimes too often in churches, in religious communities. And I wonder what your thoughts are about the current news this week that came out in these churches that some of us have heard about, and just that kind of trend that seems to pop up from time to time.
Sure. Well, our church, just like society, we have these issues that do come up. And sometimes we like to kind of shove them up under the rug. We don't want to deal with them. And to me, that is in those situations where these things tend to fester and grow because, people are not held accountable. In this case, for the viewers that may not know, there were some allegations, for example, online. A young woman shared her story. It was about what she believes was sexual exploitation by some pastors. And so that was her personal story that she shared. And have been some other cases that have come up with people with allegations of misbehavior of pastors. Of course, I admire, I respect any woman who comes forward and shares her story. Anyone who's experienced something like that, I believe they should be supported. They should be heard. And so I feel pain when I hear those stories because we really should not be having these situations in our churches. These are men of God, these are our spiritual leaders, but even in churches, these things can happen. That said, as a journalist, I would like to say that I try to be as objective as possible. And in fact, I have been working on this story for one of our magazines. And I think we have to provide the opportunity for those who have been accused to be able to respond to the allegations, because there are always two sides of a story. And I think, to be fair and balanced, that we should give them that opportunity to respond. So I have personally, as a journalist, reached out to some of the pastors who have been accused, and I'm waiting to hear back to see if I could get a response from them. I've also reached out to the conferences to see what will be done. The allegations are very serious. Therefore, I think that they should be looked into. I think there should be an investigation on the part of the conferences, and they should be able to tell us what the action will be if it is that these things did occur. So that's my viewpoint. Mm-hmm.
Have you in your career covered stories like that before, whether in a church organization or some other institution? Have you covered stories like that where prominent individuals were accused of, misconduct like that?
Sure. I've covered stories of prominent people doing all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And, those are hard, difficult stories to cover. But if you handle the story, again, trying to be balanced, trying to understand all sides of the story, again, but what's really important as a journalist is part of what we do. We are watchdogs in the community. We hold public officials, leaders in the community accountable. Somebody has to hold people accountable. And, sometimes we're not comfortable with that, even in the church. And I teach classes, journalism classes with students in a Christian environment. And I teach them to go after the news, be truth seekers. We're here to seek out the truth. We're here to be a voice for the voiceless. We are here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And sometimes people are not comfortable with that, but it's important because that's the only way, unless we shed light on some of these issues, that's the only way they get addressed. And it is important that we do address the issues.
Yes, and I think the affliction of the comfortable is the part that I'm always advocating for, because too often the ones that are silenced are the ones that are afflicting the comfortable. We want to, too often there's a group that we protect, that we often want to maintain their comfort. And so we silence the other who it's inevitably it's those that are not able to speak for themselves or not allowed permission to speak. And so, I tend to get a little irritated by how quickly we run to the defense of the accused and say, oh, well, what did she, what did she, she probably brought it on herself or what have you. But it'll be interesting to see how things play out. And what I'm intrigued by our guest today. I know we're not going to really get into that aspect of her story so much, but I'm intrigued by her story because there's so many aspects to her story that you all really should hear and know more. She has a whole book that covers a wide range of topics, one of them being this backdrop of religion. And that's why I sort of brought that up. I thought it was so interesting that this news story broke this week, because that backdrop of sort of extreme religious belief system, which kind of allows for the silencing of certain voices, is really kind of what allows for other for that kind of behavior to sort of continue. And I think it's really important to be aware that goes on. So why don't you talk a little bit about our guest for today?
Oh, I'm very excited. I've had the privilege of working with this wonderful woman for the last 2.5 years. She's the reason why I'm at Southern Adventist University. She was very persistent, and she even got me to move to Collegedale, Tennessee, my husband and I, and we're here now.
I was talking to you yesterday. I was like, wait, you actually moved? I thought it was like a temporary thing.
Yes. And it's all because of Dr. Rachel Williams Smith. So our guest today is Dr. Rachel Williams Smith, who is currently the Dean of the School of Journalism and Communication at Southern Adventist University. Before that, she was the department chair and graduate program director at Andrews University. And before that, she was director of the Oakwood University LEAP Adult Degree Completion Program. So she has held a number of positions. She holds an EDD in educational leadership and management, as well as a PhD in communications and a master's degree in English. Okay.
Amazing.
An ambitious woman. But before all of that, Rachel was a little girl who lived in the hills of rural Tennessee. So please take a look at this.
If my life were a movie, no one would believe it. When I was just 6 years old, my parents began to separate from society as they followed their ever-increasingly strict religious views. We ended up living on 50 acres in Tennessee, an abandoned hilltop in an old house, isolated from other people and without electricity, running water, television, telephones. When my brother was horribly burned in a gasoline fire, we didn't take him to the hospital. We handled all of our own problems at home. I was homeschooled, we grew our own food, we made our own clothes, and we lived in this way while we waited for the world to come to an end. When I was 16, I found myself forced to live in a world that I was not prepared to live in. I ran from passing cars. When I was asked to mow a lawn, I didn't know anything about shampoo and conditioner or how to style my hair when I finally took off the bonnet. And I struggled with school and with regular social cultural norms. And I didn't know a lot about guys. So I ended up marrying the first man that I dated. And when that was shattered on the rocks of divorce, I went through heartache, confusion, pain, and the wonderment if I had been abandoned by God. But He never abandoned me. Born Yesterday is a testimony of God's faithful, restorative, loving care. And what I hope for when you read this book, I hope you find in its pages a testimony, a story that will inspire you to discover in your own life how God always is working together for your good, to make you whole, to restore, and to heal you.
And talk to us today about thriving, not just surviving. It is you, Rachel. You have learned how to do both. Welcome to Hey Girl. So glad to have you.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Kim.
It's such an amazing story. I mean, it's truly a page turner. I haven't been able to put it down since I picked it up. It's just incredible, all the things that you've been through, honestly. I mean, people get a really sense, I think a real sense of it just looking at that trailer, honestly. Oh, man. So, yeah, you've come a long way.
You think so?
Yeah, I think.
So Rachel, in the
Yes.
first chapter of your book, okay, and it is a page turner, and really, you know, when Rachel is a walking miracle. I work with her every day, and to see where she is and what she has come through is just amazing. So in the first chapter of your book, you describe what seemed like a typical childhood. You know, it's the perfect narrative because it just starts out, everything is just normal. You know, you have mischievous brothers. I think a lot of people can relate to that. You have a stern father, a working mother. She was a registered nurse, like my parents were. And then all of a sudden something changed. What was it like transitioning from that normal childhood as a little girl to a lifestyle void of all of the modern conveniences that most of us enjoy? Did it happen abruptly or was it over time?
Well, there were actually a couple of stages. I think the very first beginning was when my mom came into my room one day. I was about 6 years old. I was sitting on the floor playing with my little plastic animals, and she opened my closet door and she showed me that my dresses were, she showed me my dresses and she said, "Honey, look at these, and then I want to show you something." And she showed me in the Bible that Jesus had a garment down to the foot. And she also read some passages from another book that we turned to for inspiration. And it was talking about how women should wear their dresses 2 to 3 inches from the floor. And she said to me, "Honey, do you want to be like Jesus and wear your dress down to the foot?" I didn't know what to say about that, but she said, "Think about it." And so I thought about it. And of course, a little bit I went to her and I said, "Mommy, I want to be like Jesus." What 6-year-old would say differently anyway? So yes, I want to be like Jesus. So that was where a shift, occurred, but it wasn't life-changing at that point. There were changes to our diet as well that were happening. And we also weren't going to church as often anymore, but I didn't really focus on that or notice that as much. What really changed things was when my parents decided to take my brothers out of the elementary school that they were in, a Christian elementary school, and decided not to put me in. And that brought a visit from the City Board of Education, because this is back around 1972, 1971, 1972, something like that. And homeschooling wasn't legal. And so they basically said we had to either be put in school or they were going to take us from our parents. So then my father decided, "No, you're not." And he packed us up in a van in the middle of the night and whisked us off to the mountains, Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. So that's where my life abruptly changed.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
man. What did that feel like for you? Were you thinking this is like some great adventure, or did you feel like terrified? or at that age, did it just seem like, oh, yeah, we're packing up in the car and going on a little trip, no big deal?
The thing about being a child is that you tend to take life as it comes. So whatever happens is just what happens. And you don't really, you may know it's different or strange, but you're not thinking, you're just not reflective at that age. It's just life happening, so it's just one episode and then the next and okay, so.
So the whole long dresses and bonnet and thing, you weren't resentful at all. You were just like, oh, okay. When mom comes in and says your dresses need to be longer, you're just kind of going with it. It's no big deal.
Well, I didn't like some of the changes. Definitely didn't necessarily relate to the dietary changes. I had my favorite things, so that I noticed and didn't necessarily appreciate. With the dresses, what she did was she took material and sewed it around the border of my dress to make it longer. So then it was this tacked together job. And I told her, "I don't like it. It doesn't look pretty." And so she put some rickrack. She put some rickrack around the seam and around the bottom. And she said, "That makes it okay, But I didn't know that was going to be the beginning of my wearing homemade, not just long dresses, but homemade, basically very basic put together clothes from then until I was, close to 16, not close to, until I was about 16 years old. Very plain homemade clothes, dresses, and bonnets. I started wearing bonnets when I was about 7. That was the next thing. Women need to cover their head when they pray and worship. So from there, it was a whole story of how that morphed into the bonnet, but full bonnet on my head. Yeah.
Right.
And so you being the only girl in the family, you mentioned that just now that there were certain rules that you had as a young woman. What was it like growing up in that household with that focus on you as how a young lady's supposed to behave?
Well, I was listening to you talking earlier, and I was just thinking about being raised in an environment where there were an extraordinary amount of rules related to being a female, how to walk, stand, sit, speak, and we were out there on 50 acres, mostly just, my family, people would come to see our weird lifestyle and learn from us. But it wasn't like we were around people, a lot of people every day, but there were a lot of strict rules. I know, especially as, when we got out there, I was 9. I should have mentioned that probably about 9 years old, we bought 50 acres out in the wilderness and ended up out there. And so when people would come, often, I remember one time I came in the house and I bent over to get the jugs of water to go fill up in the stream. And after it was over, I got in big trouble because you're not supposed to bend over in the presence of men. And there was a lot of things like this where there was just, I felt guilty, especially as I started maturing, and my began to change physically. I often felt very much as if I was sinful just for being female. And I know that wasn't the intention. That wasn't the intention, but it was what happened. And I think we can easily slide into that in our attempts to be right and to be morally sound. We can slide into areas that are really problematic, in terms of how we're dealing with our children, dealing with, the opposite sex, because often people are picking on the things that are easy to target as sinful. So, if you look at this, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep talking. So
please do.
say this, and I'm going to, no, I want this to be a conversation. But, the Bible talks about the 7 deadly sins, and look at what they are. Things like, pride and cruelty and things like that are mentioned in Proverbs as the things that the Lord hates: a lofty look, a lying tongue, hands that are fast to shed innocent blood. Right. There's not any of these moral things mentioned. It's not that they don't matter. It's just that they are the easiest things for us to pick on with one another because they grow out of the deepest part of our being, need and legitimate. There's legitimate need and longing that can get twisted up with selfishness and the mess of humanity. And so we pick at those things because that's where shame can be brought in. I'm right, you're wrong. I can shame you. I can dominate you. And when I look at how Jesus handled the woman in adultery, and she was caught in adultery, okay, but obviously the men who did it were not caught. So when she was brought to him in adultery, he didn't treat her. I mean, she already knew she had done something wrong. He didn't need to press that home, but he treated her with a compassion that we often don't treat one another when it comes to these kinds of sins that are so easily targeted.
Wow.
I want to say one more thing about that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I thought something was so important that you said in your book was that you were made responsible for that sin. You as a girl in the house was responsible for if there was something that was inappropriate, it was your fault. Even if, and the example of the woman caught in adultery, it takes 2 people to commit adultery, but she was the one that was held responsible in that incident, right? And so there's this interesting thing that happens, that there's one person who is blamed, even though there's 2 people that have to commit the act. It's this interesting thing that tends to happen, that we want to just put the responsibility on one person as though they are the responsible party who's going to carry the burden of that sin alone.
That's true. And it wasn't indirect in my home. It was explicit. Like, if men act inappropriately towards you, it's because you invited it. I would be taught. Yeah. So that was taught explicitly. Now, most people probably wouldn't go to that end, but there was that overt teaching in my home. So that's why you needed to cover thoroughly. I mean, in summertime, my sleeves, my dresses were down here, maybe 3/4 length at the most, a little bit of arm there. That's it. It was all about avoiding. And I want to say, I believe that we need to be responsible in how we dress. We are our brother's keeper. We sisters, we're our brother's keeper. Brothers, you're your sister's keeper. We have to look out for one another. We should not do things that overtly and deliberately stir lust in the hearts of somebody else. But you can't avoid all the things that could possibly cause somebody to be tempted. The very fact that you're a female can cause somebody to be tempted. And God never intended for us to be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah, it can't be only on one person to carry the weight of responsibility of everyone around you. That's ridiculous.
Not at all. You guys got me to go into the weeds on something I wasn't going to go into.
I realize that, but I think there's this culture, right? There's this culture of that, where it's the woman's responsibility to make sure men behave, and I think that gets my goat all the time. It's just like, are you kidding me?
Each
So
person is
anyway,
responsible for the choices they make. Every person
yeah,
is responsible, and God knows the heart.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So, Rachel, before we get to the hills of Tennessee, there was a period where you and your family lived in a school bus.
Yes.
Tell me how
Mercy.
that came about,
That was
and what was that like living in a school bus?
interesting. Yes,
Okay, well, this is the 1970s, so free love and hippies and all of that stuff. And converted school buses wasn't
yes.
that odd
On
a thing.
Mount St. no less. I thought, oh my word.
Well, when we left, I mentioned we left, and we left in a van, right? Volkswagen van, and but then we ended up staying with some people, and then got a mobile home, but that didn't work out financing wise very well, apparently. So the next thing is my father found this bus that was a white bus, and it was partially converted into a home, and so he finished the conversion and went and parked it in the people's land. And then from there, we ended up in a state park, living in the camping area, in a bus. And then from there, when we did move onto the hill, it was once again in a bus. So the bus allowed us to be able to avoid some things, stay mobile if we needed to, and yet have a place to live. So I was raised in a bus, yes.
Amazing.
The way you all have to get the book, but she describes it, and it's kind of ingenious, actually. I mean, you describe it very well. I could picture how they had it set up, and I was just amazed. I mean, who would think of doing that? But I mean, it's just amazing that you all were able to make that work. How you converted it and made the table for, you came down for dinner, and then it went up and was like support for the bed. I mean, it was just like, wow, okay.
Well, we kind of have this now with this minimalistic living,
Yeah,
the tiny
tiny house.
houses. It was the same idea, just,
Yeah,
way back then.
right. Y'all started it off.
Yes.
So though your parents took what may seem like extreme measures by mainstream standards, some parents, especially those with strong religious beliefs, might be able to relate to this desire to shelter their children from the outside world. As a parent yourself, can you relate to all your parents did and the mindset that they may have had at that time to shelter you all? I mean, as you said, they were wanting to homeschool. I know a lot of parents are doing the homeschool thing even now, and homeschooling wasn't a thing back then. So, in some way, are you? Should we maybe be more sympathetic to what it is they were trying to do, regardless of how they went about it? What are your
Yes.
thoughts looking back at what they
Sure.
were?
I think there's two parts to this answer, because one part is related to how I feel about what my parents did, and the other part is how extreme it actually was. So I know, Alva, I don't know if you're planning to ask me about that, but I think there would be something missing if we don't get an idea of how, or to what degree it was. So I want to take that in consideration as I answer this. I understand. I do not feel any resentment toward my parents. They're both gone now. But we had much opportunity, particularly my mom and I, to talk about what they were trying to do. And I appreciate the fact that they were so convicted of what they believed that they would go to that extreme. Not the extreme itself, but their willingness to let go of everything and do it. I can appreciate that. As a parent myself, I know how much I wanted to protect my children from the things that are harmful and bad in the world and so forth. So I can understand what they were trying to do. On the other hand, there's the results. So often we parents are trying to do one thing, and our motive is one thing, and then the outcome and the result is a whole other thing.
Right.
Yeah. And it's tied up too, Rachel. It was tied up too in religious ideology, right? I mean, end times, Christ is coming soon. We don't have time for all these worldly things.
They didn't think you
Tell
were
us
going to make
about
it
that.
adulthood, right?
Yeah, it started when I didn't mention, but my father was a captain in the Air Force. So we were stationed over in Madrid, Spain, back in normal life before everything happened. So this is pre 6 years old, I think between the age of 2 and 5. And so while we were there, my parents could not listen, they couldn't understand the Spanish services. So they started reading all these little books and stuff, and they began learning a lot of the reforms, and they began focusing on the fact that, began to believe that Jesus was coming really soon. Like they could tag it to the end of the 1970s or early 1980s is what they believed. Not the day and the hour, but definitely the decade, or the span of years that it would happen. So as they developed these kind of beliefs, their idea was to separate from the world and prepare for Jesus' come. So that was the whole, that was what started all of this, was separating from worldly influences and preparing for Christ's coming.
Wow. And I think a lot of parents can relate to that. I mean, we have all been raised in a religion that is very much the focus. And I think now, even with coronavirus, for example, and COVID-19, you're hearing a lot more about people talking about, moving out to the country. This could be a sign of the end. Do you have any warnings or insight that you can provide for many of us as we're grappling with what we're seeing in the world today and so many things that are just out of the norm?
I hear a lot about people saying they want to prepare for, trouble as times come, the time of trouble, things like that. And I think there's, disaster preparedness is really important to do, to have that reasonable preparation. But if we're trying to prepare ourselves for the end of the world, I'm not sure that no matter how many canisters of beans you stock up in your home and canisters of rice, and no matter how many gardens you grow, that it will get you through that time. I think the thing that we neglected in the midst of all of this was two things: faith and love. Those two things are at the heart of everything that matters. And what happens is you can get so focused on the truths that you're interested in that you lose sight of the truth, which was Jesus. So we got centered off of that. And then as a result, when we did associate with other people, it was always conflict and strife and debate. It wasn't, there was not that outreaching through love and ministry and faith. We're trying to protect ourselves and store up for the time of trouble, and we're not trusting God in our daily lives to care for us. You don't have to live out in the wilderness to learn how to trust God. You can do that every day where you're living right now. And you can learn to love the people closest to you and to minister to them and to put their needs ahead of yours. And that's the hardest lessons in the world. But as we allow the grace of God to sink into our hearts and make those changes, that's the best preparation for the time of trouble, from my viewpoint. I'm not a theologian, though.
That was good, though. That was a message.
So you mentioned transitioning to the wilderness. So now you could take us into the hills of Tennessee and what that was like for you on living there on a daily basis.
Well, can I turn the tables on you guys for just a minute? I know you all are interviewing me, but I feel like it's just like, okay, and then I'm just answering. So I want to ask you, you read some of my book. Can you tell me what was the most shocking things to you so far? I mean, I'll answer what it was like, but I want to know what you thought.
Well, it's funny you would say that, because I really was interested in this question. Because, listen, I am a very cold-natured person. Everyone who knows me knows that I would not have lasted 5 minutes in a winter in that wilderness. As you described the winters there and how cold it was in your house, and the layers of blankets and the honey, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And Kim would have been down that hill and down that mountain, flagging a ride. Somebody would have had to take me somewhere. And you all had a car. I was like, can y'all not get in the car and turn it on and run some heat? I don't know, something. I could not figure out how y'all managed multiple winters. And I was amused by the one, you said there was one time when there was a few families who had come up there and were, sort of signing on with the beliefs and like, yeah, we're going to do this too. And I think like the first gust of wind blew through and like all of them were like, nah. No, I think I'm a head on back down the hill. They were like, they weren't having it. Once the winter came, they were like, no, we're good. So how did you survive? So that's part one of my question. That's what shocked me, is how y'all managed the winter. But part two, kind of coupled with that, is just health. Like, how did you manage the winters being what they were? You had to have gotten sick and had illnesses and things like that. Like, how did you all manage? Like, you didn't go to doctors, and how did you deal with sicknesses, and were you sick often? And if you you mentioned the injuries. You mentioned a couple of injuries. Certainly, the really bad one was the burn that your brother suffered. How did you all handle those kinds of things? How did you manage those kinds of things? Listen, when we talk about survival, that right there blew me away.
Yes. And you have to add no running water, no electricity, no television, no radio.
Snakes, bugs, all manner. Listen, 5 minutes. 5 minutes is all I would have been able to handle.
Oh, you've been camping. You can handle more than 5 minutes.
Honey.
Oh, dear. Well, we didn't move up there my parents didn't move up there with the intention to go where there was nothing, but there was no, there was no electricity running up to the hill. So there wasn't possible. So there was no internal heat. And then we were living and we didn't have running water, no plumbing, none of that was available. And of course, none of the media. So we were living in a house that I like to say was well air conditioned in the winter, well heated in the summer, well air conditioned in the winter, had a lot of holes that would let air through. So it was well ventilated. And how do you survive? Well, we would pile into, fortunately this is Tennessee, so it didn't stay cold all the time, but it got cold, and if you think about it, as we're going into the winter here, even in Huntsville, where you are, there's days where the temperature never gets out of the 40s. Now, it's one thing to say it's not freezing, but to live like that with those kind of temperatures day after day, that gets distressing. We did have wood stoves, so we would, house would be warm when the wood stoves were burning, but at night they would go out. And then, because we kind of went to bed not so long after we had kerosene lamps and stuff like that for light, but we couldn't afford to burn a lot of kerosene. So you go to bed early, the fire goes out, the temperature gets cold. That one night that I refer to as my coldest night, the temperature outside dropped to 10 below zero. And inside it was about 10 above. And wow. I actually suffered some severe frostbite and other things from that. Yeah.
I'm remembering the description. You were like, my feet were frozen. They were blocks of ice, even though I had like 4 pairs of socks and like 16 blankets.
My heels were hard like marbles. Yes. So I'm very, very and then factor in another thing, having to go to an outhouse whenever you need to do certain things. So
like getting soaked on the toilet seat, y'all. I'm like, Mom had to like pour warm water to get her bottom off the seat. Okay, we're talking serious stuff here.
So on that night, my mom did worry about our survival. There were times when our parents worried about our survival. It was that real, okay? Like, are they going to make it? But they taught us to be tough. They taught us to handle, what was it? The Bible says, handle hardness like a good soldier. So we did try to take care of, diet and so forth. So we didn't get sick a lot, but we also didn't have great food. If that's contradictory. We tried to take care of our health, but we didn't have great food. That's because we were poor. So sometimes it was just rice and beans. I'm talking about days on end, rice and beans. I remember at one point,
like 2 meals a day.
Oh yeah, that was my choice, but the rice and beans was my poverty. Yeah, in fact, and having to scrounge. Sometimes it's like, go find your food today. So go out there and go find roots and the inner bark of trees and other things that we can eat. Yeah, so it was definitely more than they intended when they didn't go in with the intent to do all of this. But once
they didn't know it would be like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. They didn't. But once they were in the middle of it, it was kind of like, well, this is good preparation for the time of trouble. So they justified it. You see, that was the thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So it would be interesting.
There's a question. Did your parents have mentors to survive? That's Kieta Walker asking a question. Did your parents have mentors? So yeah, well, they're figuring this out as they go as well.
No, they actually helped influence quite a few people to set up similar lifestyles like this. Most of them were not quite as severe as this, but no, they didn't have mentors. They were figuring this out on their own. My mom had been she grew up in Connecticut, and she had a uncle that lived in Danbury, Connecticut. And so she would they had an outhouse and they had a farm. So she, she'd use some of those things to help her to realize what to do. So she was the practical one. I think those two could have never made it without each other. My dad had all the ideas, and my mom was the one that figured out how to make it practical.
Mercy. So. And she was a nurse, so I guess that helped some. She had some medical background.
Yes, but there were things they didn't know. I remember my brother got horribly burned. I'm talking about, deep.
Horrible, that story about his. It's a miracle he survived.
It was. And, the deep burns on his neck and down to where I could actually see just under a thin layer of white skin, the artery pulsing, that level of depth. And they were using aloe vera juice, because they didn't know what to do.
Vitamin B. She's like, here, take vitamin B. I'm like, vitamin B. This boy's flesh is hanging off. There's got to be something more serious than that he needs, like a hospital.
You guys are going to scare the audience away from ever wanting to read my book. It sounds like a horror story right now.
You guys need to read this book. Okay, yes. You need to read this book. It's crazy, the stuff that happens. I'm serious. It's like, wow. It's a miracle that boy survived. I was like, how is he going to live through this? I feel like that's only God.
But if I can shift for just a moment, I want to make a point about this, because I think the reason why I wrote this book is that, and I want to point this out at this point, a lot of times people feel like religion has been used in a way that is abusive or harsh, and they're turned off by all the rules and so forth. And I want to share, this is what I went through and the level to which I experienced it. And yet in the midst of it, was able to find faith, was able to find a personal relationship with God. And that changed everything for me and made it possible for me to actually, leading me out and leading me to a path forward and being able to be restored. And so no matter how, people do what they do with religion, but in the midst of it, God still is trying to reach out and love us and save us. And it's a miracle, because in the middle of all of that, he was able to find his way to my heart. And I just want to make sure I throw that in there, because I think that's probably one of the most important things about this.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which was going to be looking back. What impact do you believe all of this had on your social, mental, and emotional development? So, that was what I was curious about. I mean, do you want to say anything more about that impact? Yeah.
Yes, I do think that so much of what I went through taught me some values that I do appreciate. One of the things is to be less materialistic and to enjoy nature. And one thing we had to do was memorize a lot of scripture. And I don't think that was ever a bad thing. Learning to be independent and think for yourself was good. My challenges, though, grew out of trying to find a loving God in the middle of all the harshness. Particularly my relationship with my father was very troubled, and there wasn't a lot of love demonstrated at all. So that stayed with me through my life, and it required deeper healing. You can be saved, you can give your heart to Jesus Christ and be saved, but it doesn't mean you're healed from all the things that have happened. That takes a different kind of work. So those things stayed in my life for a long time and required a lot of time in healing and overcoming. But I don't regret in general that I had this experience, because in my mind, I have something to share that gives others a chance to have hope, maybe, that no matter what you go through in life, no one gets to pick how you're born or where you're born or who your parents are or the circumstances under which you're raised. Nobody gets to pick that. But no matter what has happened, it doesn't mean that you can't be restored. It doesn't mean that your life can't change. It doesn't mean that you can't find hope and it's not determined by your beginnings. It's determined by your choice as you go along.
That's so good.
And Rachel, what about social relationships with other people outside of the home? Did you have people your age? Did you have friendships, peers?
So there was, for the most part, no. I was at 16. I still hadn't had a friend my age. There was a girl who lived in another area that was, sometimes we write back and forth. She was 16. There was a girl that was about 5 years younger than me. I called her my little sister, and she and her mom and brother lived up there for about 2 years on the hill. So that was my social life. And then when people would come up to learn how we lived, it seemed like they never had anybody my age, but we would kind of interact with them. But for the most part, no, I didn't have associates and companions. I didn't understand the girl talk of the day. Hey girl was not my thing, right?
Yeah. Wow. So in your book, you describe an insatiable thirst for knowledge, despite your parents' belief that furthering your education was of the devil. So you kind of talked a little bit about why they thought that. I was curious to know why they thought that, but I guess it was the whole thing of just,
right.
It was just.
Yeah, it was all part of the reformed thinking that they developed, that higher, because they both were nurses, but they both turned their back on medicine. They believed that all of that drugs and all of that was of the devil. So they stopped all of that practice, turned their back on it. Everything was naturopathic. They taught us as best they could at home. Definitely encouraged my brothers to explore and to learn. Definitely encouraged me with reading and all of that. But I just couldn't learn like math and sciences. So I just, and then in isolation, I also couldn't learn. So I lagged way behind in some things. I forgot the question though. I feel like I'm just talking out.
It was weird to me that I didn't get the whole why education was of the devil thing. But then I was going to just say, well, what was the turning point? Because you did have a love and a desire to learn. So I just wanted you to talk about how you sort of made that transition away from this idea that education was of the devil to now having multiple degrees. What sort of turned it around for you?
Well, that's that, after I began to talk to God for myself and I invited him to live in my heart, I began to just pray. And I was trying to imagine a world in which everybody had to wear a bonnet and long dress to be right. And I couldn't fathom that. And something seemed wrong. And I thought about the infinitesimal number of rules that we had governing our daily life. And I was thinking the only way a person can live like this is to be up here, isolated from everybody. So it began to raise some questions as to whether the teaching that I had was actually correct. So I began to pray and ask God. And it was like, I want to learn for myself. I want to find out what's right for myself. And then I began to notice this desire to learn and to grow intellectually. And so I kept praying and asked God to let me go to school. And so that led me, after I left what I call the hill, after I left the hill, that led me on a track that was basically education. So when I left, I still felt that it was wrong to seek higher degrees, but it ended up evolving as a part of my life because of how the circumstances rolled out. Mm-hmm. And it probably, go ahead.
And Rachel, what was it that happened? Because now we were at the climax of the story. What is it that happened that caused you all to move off of the hill?
So what happened was my father decided to go build houses in Houston, Texas, along with my older brother, because somebody had come through and convinced him he could make a lot of money very quickly doing that. And we were very poor, and finding jobs that could make money rapidly was pretty important when it happened. Had never done anything that far away, but he decided to do it. As he got ready to leave, though, he called me into a side room of our house and he handed me a little white envelope. And he said, take this and keep it because this is all you'll ever have of me. And when I opened it, it was a lock of his red hair. My father had fiery red hair. And I asked him what's going on. And he said, I'm not coming back. And that's the first clue I had of this. And then when he got in the car, my mom went over to give him a kiss, and kiss him goodbye. He turned his head. And then as the car drove away, he leaned out the window and yelled back some words to her. And I didn't understand the words, but I got the drift. He was leaving. So what that did was, once my father left, took my older brother, and then within a few months, my younger brother ended up going to join them. My mom and I couldn't handle, you're talking about, we couldn't handle everything by ourselves. You're talking about growing fields of food as well as your garden. You're talking about hauling water. You're talking about chopping down trees and splitting wood. You're talking about, splitting the logs. You're talking about everything that had to be done is manual. There was just no way we could do all, and canning. We had to preserve food so we could get through the winter, harvesting everything, preserving it, everything. There was no way we could do it all. So we asked someone if we could come stay there. It was way out in Washington State, but we wrote a lady who had a newsletter that we had been reading. And so she was planning to come visit us for the summer. And she had once before come to visit us. So she wasn't a perfect stranger. And so we asked her, could she send 2 one-way tickets so that we could come out there? Because we had no place to go. And that's what happened. But when I left excited because I knew that whatever happened, it was going to include me going to school, because that's what I had been praying for. I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know how, I didn't know where, but I knew I was going to go to school.
So that sort of changed the trajectory pretty much for you. Mm-hmm.
So what were the challenges that you faced coming into the 20th century at age 16?
One of the first ones was mowing a lawn. That lady we were staying with, she asked, I was just sitting in the house a lot because I was afraid to go out. I mean, I wasn't used to being around people, and, someone could casually look at you. Street lights bothered me, the noise of traffic, people being able to look at you casually. It was all very overwhelming and intimidating. And so I'd stay hidden in the house. And she got tired of that 16-year-old girl hidden in the house. She had chores to do. So she sent me out to mow the lawn. And I'm trying to mow this lawn, and I look up and I see a car coming, and I just took off and fled. I just ran around the house and hid. It was just instinct, And then I went back to trying to mow the lawn. It happened again, and I fled again. And so eventually I realized, if I keep doing this, I'm never going to mow. So that was my first adjustment, And it just went from there, ended up going to Fountain View Academy, which is in Canada, because it was a school that looked somewhat like, it was very liberal compared to how I was raised, but still it seemed more relatable to me. So I get there, and there's 30 of us, 30 students on campus, and I'm just overwhelmed. 30 students. And it's funny, Alva, because, some of our classes can have 30 students.
Yeah.
But to me, even in my mind, when I look back, it's like a whole universe. It's like, oh, all these people. And it was only 30 of us, but that was overwhelming to me. So, I try to jump in the conversations, and the conversation would just go silent because I didn't know anything they were talking about. I'm trying to relate, and what I'm saying just doesn't make sense. So, there's social challenges, educational challenges. I was, except for reading and writing, I was pretty much starting from scratch. And so there was a lot to do, and a lot of swallowing pride and deciding I've got to learn somehow, and just digging in there and figuring out how to get through it.
Wow.
Yes, Mercy. I'm sure at times you must look back at your life with awe and wonder when you look at where you came from, thinking about those early days that, when you first started a real school and, barely able to do first grade math to where you are now. Now that you've managed to overcome what seems to be insurmountable obstacles, you've excelled in your field, you've married and have children and grandchildren. Here you are now. But now, at this point in your life, here we are in the 21st century, and you've obtained all that you have. Now you're faced with a whole new set of challenges, health challenges now. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about this new set of challenges that you're having to face and what that has been like.
Yes. I just wanted to mention, as far as you asked me, you kind of asked, what is it like to look back on this life? Every now and then it's shocking, most of the time it's just my life, but it's just, okay. And then every now and then it's like I see it through somebody else's eyes, and I'm baffled, I'm stunned, and then it goes back to being normal again. But I'm thankful for that backdrop of dealing with conflict and challenge and struggling and striving to overcome, because it's helped me now. So now, in the past 4 years, I've been dealing with multiple sclerosis. The way I found out I had multiple sclerosis was by going completely blind in my right eye. Just lost all the sight abruptly, and I realized something was wrong. Ended up going to get checked out, and through a process, I ended up being hospitalized. And through that process, discovered that I had multiple sclerosis. So, Alva, and by the way, I meant to say I love working with Alva. So she's awesome to work with. So, Alva, you've seen me sometimes with a walker or a cane. It's not every day. Most days I'm able to function normally, but I do have my times. I've had some episodes where relapses where things go down, and then I have to get I'm under treatment now, but then I might have to get more specialized treatment to come back up, and it can be interesting. But what I realize is that if I've come through all of these things, then it's a matter of taking the same lessons and applying them now. Faith is faith over fear. One day at a time. Trust instead of get mired down with all the things that could go wrong. There's a lot of lessons that I learned that I applied to what's going on now.
And I can tell you, working with Rachel, I mean, she still comes at her job with 100% energy, and she is a visionary leader. She inspires her staff and the students. You wouldn't know it unless you did see her with the walker, or, sometimes she does get tired and you can see the fatigue. But I tell you, she still puts 100% into what she does, and she is a blessing. She's been a blessing to me, to the students, and to all of us. And we love you, Rachel.
Oh, thank you.
We just thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. God is good. It's been a blessing to be there, and a blessing to do what I'm doing now. And my prayer is constantly that somehow, if I can inspire somebody to not give up because of what you're going through, to not feel as though your past has to define your future, to not choose the road of fear over the path of faith. Those basic lessons in life, if my story can inspire somebody else to do that, to believe that you can achieve, that you don't have to give up, that this is not the end, and most of all, that God can restore your life, that God can heal the damage of the past and bring you to a better place, and that you can be an overcomer. If my story can do anything to inspire someone to believe that, then that's enough for me, and I'm grateful.
Oh, it's beautiful. I tell you, I have been blessed by your story. I mean, it's just been, I think it's amazing because you have lived such an amazing life. And I am inspired by how you have responded to all the things that have happened. I mean, we've talked a lot about what your story, what what is in this book, but we haven't even touched on everything, right? So like, there's a lot that's still left untold, and yet you have just spoken so eloquently about, having hope and not being defeated, and, overcoming fear. And it just, I think that message is really ringing true. And I'm so thankful that you are allowing God to use your story to be a blessing to others. And I really hope that people are hearing that message and taking from it what God is able to do. So I just thank you for being willing to share that and continuing to share that even now as you're going through this current struggle. I think you're just a blessing and an inspiration.
Thank you so much.
Truly.
Thank you for having me.
Any last words, Alva? Thank you. And thank you, Alva. You're a blessing also.
Oh, this has been great. I just felt so honored when Kim asked me to do this. I'm saying me, but
I'm
Kim,
honored.
She knows that I would do anything for her and for my baby cousin Everett, who I helped raise. I take all credit for him being a wonderful husband and a wonderful father. But no, he's wonderful. She's wonderful. And I'm happy to be a part of what you're doing. And we're praying, both Rachel and I. I'm sure I speak for both of us when I say we wish you and are praying for the best for you and your ministry here. Anything that we can do to help you, we're happy to do. And it's been a blessing being a part of this today.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you both. I truly am honored to have you all on, and I appreciate your prayers, and look forward to doing this again in maybe another forum or maybe over another topic. So
you're a great host, nice and trendy and stylish and cutting edge. I like that.
Oh, y'all are great. Y'all are great. Well, we're going to leave it there. I am going to throw it to our scripture. Guys, thank you all who are in the comments. I see all of you commenting as well and chiming in. If there are additional questions for Rachel, we're going to put information about how to find her book and other ways that you can contact her. So definitely look for that in the comments. And if there are other questions, they will come on afterwards to respond to those. We're going to throw it to our scripture, which the first one is coming from Matthew 7:15. It says, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." And in Matthew 13:30, it says, "Let wheat and weeds grow together until the harvest. I will say to the reapers, gather together first the weeds and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." And Matthew 6:7-12 says, "And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors." Matthew 6:7-12. I feel like those verses remind us that institutions and systems of religious systems are imperfect, and often leaders in such institutions may be imperfect as well. But God is reminding us that he remains the same and he is perfect, and we should always turn to him for direction and guidance. And we must be mindful to forgive one another and turn to him for our daily bread, and that his will ultimately be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that Rachel's story is a beautiful one of redemption, and reminds us that if we stay connected to God, that ultimately he will get us through whatever we are going through. And so I thank you all for being with us today and for joining us for this very important conversation. Listen, you need to stay around next and be here with us again next week, because it's going to be another important conversation. It's the marriage episode, round 2. Ooh, we got some stuff to dig into again. So be sure to tune in. I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Do you know what this next week is? It's what we've all been waiting for, the marriage episode. So grab your man and come on over. We've got some stuff to talk about. Infidelity, intimacy, and integrity. If we're serious about thriving and surviving, you know we have to begin right here at home. So the crew is back to tackle the tough topics. Hey, we may not have all the answers, but we will do our best. So I hope you will join us.